but here I'd like to take the time to acknowledge and introduce, but in the interest of time, I'll just have to limit it. First of all, I guess you heard me mention, Arthur Greenberg is a former jurisprudence awardee. He's here, right here. Arthur Greenberg came all the way up from Los Angeles. And the reason he came up, the reason he came up because his son, one of my dearest friends and a lecturer at Stanford University Law School for almost 30 years, Arthur, I don't know, I mean, you are brilliant. Your son is brilliant. I don't know what they got in those Greenberg genes, but anyway, thank you for being here. And of course, Joe Marshall. Now, I am an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco. Now, I didn't get it. I mean, I got partially maybe on my merits and so forth. That's the reason. That's the reason. Joe Marshall's a trustee at the University of San Francisco, and he spoke to the people there, and they suggested that I come and teach. And I hope I haven't embarrassed them or anything since then. Stand up since then. And then finally, two friends of mine who came up from Los Angeles. Now, you know, I'm an only child. I don't have any brothers and sisters. Closest thing I have is a brother from another mother. That's Carl Dickerson. Sitting right there, came all the way up from Los Angeles to see me. Now, when I come down to visit Carl, he meets me at the airport, I say, Carl, which of my cars are you going to meet me in? Because he's a collector of cars. Now, I just want you to know, he's a rich Negro. And the other person, never mind, is Norman Martin. Norman Martin, stand up, Norman. And Norman, now you're looking at an African-American who's fluent and speaks Laotian. Anyway, he was a translator in South Vietnam for the Special Forces Unit. That Negro there speaks all those languages, Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian. Now that's his former life, but his current life, he is one of the most knowledgeable, distinguished persons in hospital management and acquisitions of hospitals. And when I was 17 days in the ICU last year, and I was at these hospitals, I thought about you, Norman. I said, well, I know I'm going to get well, because Norman's going to find a good hospital for me to be in. Anyways, I am so delighted to be here now. I'm going to just share you a little bit about myself. You know, during orientation week, September 1949, for freshmen at Columbia College, Columbia University, we were directed to the bulletin board in the lobby of Hartley Hall, the dormitory to which I had been assigned. Me and other students had to see which sections of classes we had been designated for the coming semester. I'm looking for my name. Behind me, over my shoulder, I heard a voice with a southern accent of a student that I had met earlier during orientation week. The voice behind me said, Jonesy, you are screwed. I turned to look at a white student from San Antonio, Texas. I asked, what do you mean? He replied that he could see that I had been assigned to classes where quote, there were lots of kikes, close quote. I asked, what is a kike? He responded, a Jew boy, dummy. He continued, look at the high schools they came from next to their names. He then recited high school names like Bronx High School of Science, Fields and Ethical Culture, Stuyvesant, Brooklyn High School, George Washington, etc., Little Red Schoolhouse. Now, none of these schools meant anything to me at the time. I replied, so what? So he said, Jonesy boy, you might be pretty smart to get admitted to Columbia, but you were one dumb Negro if you don't know what a kike is. I thought to myself, welcome to New York, Jonesy boy. As my freshman semester commenced and continued, these so-called Jew boys became my closest friends at Columbia. I soon noticed that we were the ones who were best prepared when asked questions by our professors. Now, prior to Columbia College, I spent years, many years, as an only child, 6 years, when I was 6 to 14, my parents were domestic household servants. I was born, they didn't have a home of their own. So I lived in the servants' quarters of the place where they worked. And so I guess around about 6 years old, my mother particularly decided we had to do something better for our young son. So they put me in a Catholic boarding school run by the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament at Cornwall site, Pennsylvania. The school was for indigent colored boys and Native Americans, boys. Later, at a public high school in southern New Jersey, 70% white, 30% Negro, I never heard or don't remember hearing the word kike or any mention of Jews that would draw my attention. At Columbia, I became very friendly with Bobby Nemiroff. He did not attend Columbia, but NYU. Although graduating Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude, he was barred from attending his own graduation because he was expelled from NYU for climbing the NYU flagpole in the middle of the night and hanging a giant banner that said in 1952, "Ban the bomb." Bobby's parents owned an Israeli restaurant, an entertainment nightclub called the Habibi. His mother, May, spoke no English, only Yiddish. Bobby would take me to his parents' restaurant, where we would eat near the kitchen door entrance to the nightclub. His mother would regularly pinch the sides of my stomach and say that I needed to eat more. From her, and later attending a Jewish summer camp as a counselor, I learned to understand and almost speak fluently Yiddish. Bobby would later marry one of my dearest friends, Lorraine Hansberry. Yes, the same woman who wrote the acclaimed Broadway play, A Raisin in the Sun, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, and the sign is Sidney Brewstein's window. In accepting this ADL award this afternoon, I want to send a message to surrounding communities in our state, our nation, and the world, that we from the Civil Rights Movement generation remember, especially African Americans, we shall never forget that in 1936, Martin Niemöller, a Lutheran minister and early Nazi supporter, later imprisoned by opposing Hitler's regime, said, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak." And we also remember 2 years later, November 9th to November 10th, 1938, an incident known as Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass. Nazis in Germany torched synagogues, vandalized Jewish homes, schools, and businesses, and killed close to 100 Jews. We will also remember that on April 11th, 1945, the U.S. Army under General Eisenhower liberated Buchenwald and Dachau and other camps of horror. One of Eisenhower's officers asked him, why were they taking so many pictures, since a detailed written report was planned? And Eisenhower is reported to have replied, just in case some future generation may question the accuracy of our written reports, we want to be sure that there's a film of what we saw here today. September 15, 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 young girls attending Sunday school were blown to bits by sticks of dynamite, planted by the local Ku Klux Klan 2 weeks after the August 28, 1968, historic March on Washington. June 8, 1964, just a year later, 16 rabbis were arrested in St. Augustine, Florida, in response to my beloved brother Dr. King's earlier call for religious leaders to join him in his efforts to desegregate public facilities in St. Augustine, Florida. At that time, it was the largest mass arrest of rabbis in the United States. And of course, June 1964, when two Jewish young men, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and their black colleague James Chaney, were murdered for attempting to register blacks to vote in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I knew Robert and Carolyn Goodman, the mother of murdered Andrew Goodman, as well as my good friend David Goodman. There is a memory that is etched in my mind that I will never, ever forget. In walking into their apartment on 86th Street during that June, when they were waiting to hear about what happened to their son. Their eyes were puffed, swollen with grief, red and crying and sobbing. In January 1968, I remember that Dr. King, a few months before his assassination, he went with Rabbi Joshua Heschel up to a conservative assembly of rabbis in the Catskills, New York. The rabbis had invited Rabbi Heschel to celebrate his 65th birthday with them. He had told them that he would be bringing Dr. King with him. They knew of Heschel's and King's close friendship. Dr. King described to me how when he and Rabbi Heschel entered this banquet hall to commemorate Rabbi Heschel's birthday, their arms interlocked stood 1,000 rabbis against the surrounding wall of the banquet hall, singing in unison in Hebrew, "We shall overcome." And I also remember in 1980, now St. Oscar Romero, prelate of the Catholic Church in El Salvador, the fourth Archbishop of San Salvador, was assassinated while officiating Mass in the chapel of the Hospital of the Divine Providence. He had spoken out against poverty, social injustice, assassinations, and torture. And more recently, June 17th, 2015, a Val Weiss supremacist, Dylan Root, walked into a black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and cold-bloodedly kills 9 African Americans assembled in a Bible study room. Just a little over a year ago, August 11th, 2017, 79 years after the November 1938 Kristallnacht, the sign of the night of the broken glass, so-called alt-right white men and women marched at night carrying lighted torches in Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Well, I'm here today to say what some may be unwilling or uncomfortable to say publicly to the white racists in Charlottesville, Virginia, and to all in our nation responsible for the historic rise in racist, hate-motivated violence. Oh yes, the Jews will replace you. And so will us, all of us with them, who are non-Jews, black, brown, Asian, Catholic, Protestants, Muslims, straight, or LGBTQs. We are here to proclaim to everyone who can hear us and to read about what we say here today, that when a racist walks into a synagogue in Pittsburgh out of his hatred for our Jewish brothers and sisters, it is as if they had walked into any one of our homes, schools, or places of worship, and we will come after you. There is no sanctuary you can seek that's beyond our reach. You may beat, injure, and possibly kill some of us, but we will still come after you. We will not be intimidated. We will organize our voting power block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, precinct by precinct, county by county, state by state, to form a non-violent army to politically and morally seize your weapons and stop your vicious, putrid hate. And we have a message for some members of today's younger generation of African Americans, some of whom have become attracted by Minister Louis Farrakhan's Million Man Marches. Call for them to be more responsible male members of their families. That in and of itself is good. But they may have been blindsided or stood silent as they heard Minister Farrakhan repeat his anti-Semitic filth. However, we, nor should you, be silent when he calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and repeats his verbal and written statements about Jews, identical to what Hitler and the Nazis said during their Third Reich. Although distinct and separate from Farrakhan's statements, some of the new generation of African American media and online personalities also seem to be ignorant about elementary Middle East geography. Dr. Mark Lamont from Temple University called recently for countries to boycott or divest from Israel in a speech given to the United Nations International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. That's his right to do so. But when he said in that speech that, quote, justice requires a free Palestine from sea to sea, he's not talking about a two-state solution. Lamont describes a political geography in the Middle East that assumes the non-existence of Israel as a nation-state. Now, in our discussions about the dispute to be resolved between Israel and the Palestinians over the continued occupation of Israel of a substantial amounts of Palestinian lands, we have to be careful not to equate anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel as being the same. They are not. We have to be very careful and measured and not to label every criticism of Israel's dispute with the Palestinians as anti-Semitic. As I said, they are not. Applied domestically, this would be equivalent to saying when whites who legitimately criticize an African American are presumptively racist. In a recent op-ed piece in the New York Times by Michelle Goldberg, she reminds us on this critical, touching subject, quote, Israel has foreclosed the possibility of two states, relentlessly expanding into the West Bank and signaling to the world that the Palestinians will never have a capital in East Jerusalem, as long as the de facto possibility of the Israeli government is that there should be only one state in historic Palestine. It's unreasonable to regard Palestinian demands for equal rights in that state as anti-Semitic. That is a reasoned point of view that she has. As in our own country, political party leaders of governments in power come and go. So too in Israel. Several years ago, I was invited to be a guest to speak at the Herzliya Conference in Israel. I was invited by the Chief of Intelligence for the Israeli Air Force. Half of the members in my audience were in uniform in the IDF. And I talked frankly about the questions that they had to address. And they listened to me. And some of the things they may have said, they may have thought critically. But at the end of my discussion, not only did I get a standing ovation, but several members of the IDF in uniform came over and they hugged me and commended me and so forth. And my host who invited me And he said, you know, we understand and we're committed to our existence and understand what we're doing. We can take that. That's why you were applauded. Now, we reject any call by some in this new generation of African Americans to turn our backs on our Jewish brothers and sisters, grandsons and granddaughters of families who were murdered during the Holocaust. We know that without their help during the Civil Rights Movement, under the leadership of Dr. King, we would not have most of the judicial and legislative civil rights accomplishments we enjoy today. In this connection, I want to pay special tribute to the Spill the Honey Foundation. They're making a film called Shared Legacies, which is now in post-production with the participation of most of the living civil rights witnesses of the film. The film accurately and pointedly tells the stories of cooperation between the African American and Jewish communities. Now, for those of us assembled today here at this great luncheon, and as we deal with some of these issues that I've discussed with you, I believe the moral challenge and responsibility for us today, who support the work of the ADL, is to never forget the powerful words of Rabbi Yaakov Prince, then president of the American Jewish Congress, when he spoke that Wednesday afternoon, August 28, 1963, at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Among other things, Rabbi Prince said, and I quote, "When I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent, the most disgraceful. A great people, which had created a great civilization, had become a nation of silent onlookers." He's talking about Germany. "They remain silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder." We should never forget those words. Nor should you forget today what I said earlier in response to the racist chants in Charlottesville, Virginia, that the Jews will not replace us. Oh no, yes. Yes, they will. And so will thousands and millions of people who support the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Let me repeat, we are coming after you. Do I hear an amen? Amen. Thank you. Things you have to digest that's occurring. It's not only the documented rise in anti-Semitic acts that the ADL has documented, but you also have to see the confluence of those facts with the ubiquitous rise of gun violence and the use of the internet. You have a circumstance in our country today that has never existed before. So it's not just the increased use of hate, it's the increased use of hate occurring at the same time where gun violence and the use of guns is proliferating. And this is all conversion at a time where there's a means to influence masses of people. So I say to you, and I'm not exaggerating, that we have to be vigilant and on our guard. But I'm also saying to you that we have to collectively send a message. Okay? Dr. King was nonviolent, I'm nonviolent, okay? But nonviolent doesn't mean non-inaction. And I think that every time there's a national act of outrage, we who oppose them, we have to send them a message. We're coming after you. We're coming after you. We're not going to tolerate it. As I said in my speech, some person walks into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, it's like walking into any one of our homes. And we have to collectively send a message. No, 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 not on our watch, in our time. Thank you.